An orphan girl silently cleaned a ranch gate. What the owners did next shocked everyone. The sun rose lazily over the rolling hills, casting golden beams across the expansive fields of the Windermere Ranch. A light morning breeze rustled through the leaves of the grand oak trees that lined the long gravel road, gently brushing the edges of the tall grass. Birds chirped cheerfully from hidden perches, breaking the silence of dawn. At the main gate, tucked in the shadow of towering wooden beams, stood a small girl named Emily, no older than 10. Her thin figure was draped in clothes too worn and oversized for her delicate frame, yet she moved with quiet determination, holding a damp cloth tightly in her tiny hands. Emily was an orphan, her parents lost tragically in an accident she scarcely remembered. For as long as she could recall, she'd moved between foster homes, each more indifferent than the last, until she eventually found herself at the doorstep of Windermere Ranch. Although officially placed in another home nearby, she often escaped to the ranch, drawn by a strange and comforting connection she felt whenever she stood before its sprawling grounds. No one had ever noticed her quiet efforts to keep the ranch entrance clean, scrubbing away dirt and dust each morning. The gate, engraved with the name Windermere in ornate iron letters, had become her silent companion, a constant in her otherwise turbulent life. Emily had no idea who owned the ranch or even why she felt compelled to maintain its entrance, yet the task gave her purpose and peace. Today was no different. Emily dipped the cloth into a bucket of water she'd carried from a nearby stream, carefully wringing out the excess before continuing her meticulous work. Her delicate fingers traced each letter carefully, clearing away the grime accumulated overnight. Her long brown hair, tangled from neglect, fell across her face as she concentrated deeply. She brushed it aside impatiently, smudging dirt onto her pale cheek. Across the fields, the distant silhouette of the main house loomed majestically. Inside, the owners of Windermere Ranch, the Matthews family, prepared for another busy day. James Matthews, the patriarch, stood by the kitchen window, sipping his morning coffee as he watched the ranch hands beginning their daily chores. Beside him, his wife Eleanor hummed softly, arranging flowers freshly cut from the garden. Their daughter, Elizabeth, nearly 30 years old and fiercely independent, entered the kitchen dressed in riding attire, ready to check on the horses. James watched as Elizabeth quickly grabbed an apple from the counter, smiling as she headed outside. His eyes drifted across the property, landing finally upon the distant gate where a small figure was hunched, silently working. He squinted, leaning closer to the window in curiosity. "Eleanor, do you see that?" he asked softly. She paused her arranging, joining him at the window. Her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Is that a child?" James placed his coffee cup down slowly, never removing his gaze from the girl. "I think it is," he murmured, feeling a strange tightening in his chest. "What could she possibly be doing out there?" Eleanor stepped closer to the window, her gentle face etched with concern as she gazed at the delicate figure meticulously working at their ranch's entrance. She adjusted her glasses carefully, as though clarity might reveal some hidden truth. "James, perhaps we should check on her," Eleanor said softly, placing a comforting hand on her husband's arm. "She looks so small out there alone. Where could she have come from?" James didn't immediately respond. His mind was elsewhere, lost in memories he hadn't revisited in many years. The way the girl moved, with such quiet determination, was oddly familiar, reminiscent of someone from a distant past. Shaking off the thought, he turned to Eleanor and nodded firmly. "You're right. Whoever she is, we should make sure she's safe," he said, offering his wife a reassuring smile. Eleanor squeezed his hand gently, silently agreeing. Outside, Emily continued her diligent cleaning, entirely oblivious to the concerned gaze of the ranch owners. Her mind wandered as she scrubbed each iron letter, imagining for a brief moment that she belonged here, that the ranch was home and not just another beautiful place she could only gaze at from afar. It was easier to dream, to pretend this peaceful land could somehow fill the void of family that haunted her every waking moment. Suddenly, the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel startled Emily from her thoughts. Her heart raced as she quickly looked up, noticing two figures approaching from the distant house. Fear briefly flashed through her eyes, instinctively urging her to flee, but curiosity held her firmly in place. She stood rigidly still, clutching the cloth tightly in her small fists, eyes wide and uncertain. James and Eleanor drew nearer, their expressions gentle yet unreadable. James slowed his pace, taking in the sight before him. This child was no stranger to hardship. It was written clearly in her thin form and guarded posture. Eleanor's heart melted immediately at the frightened, innocent gaze that stared back at them. "Hello there," Eleanor greeted softly, bending slightly to appear less intimidating. "It's all right, sweetheart. You're not in trouble." Emily hesitated, her voice caught painfully in her throat. She glanced nervously between the couple, searching their faces for any signs of threat or displeasure, but finding only kindness and curiosity reflected back. James moved carefully forward, sensing the child's apprehension. He lowered himself onto one knee, meeting her at eye level. His gaze, intense yet soft, studied her for a long moment. "What's your name, young lady?" Emily swallowed hard, her voice a faint whisper. "Emily." "Well, Emily, I'm James, and this is my wife, Eleanor. This ranch belongs to us," he explained gently, offering a warm, reassuring smile. "But I can't help wondering why you're out here cleaning our gate. It's awfully kind of you, but do you live nearby?" Emily shook her head timidly, strands of hair falling once more over her eyes. "Not really," she admitted softly, "but it felt right to keep it clean." Eleanor exchanged a glance with her husband, both feeling inexplicably drawn to the mysterious child standing before them. James spoke again, his voice careful and measured. "Emily, would you like to come up to the house with us? Maybe tell us a bit more about yourself." Emily's heart pounded nervously, yet something in James's voice, a strange, unexplainable comfort, drew her closer. Slowly she nodded, stepping forward uncertainly, never imagining the way her life was about to irrevocably change. The walk from the gate to the ranch house was brief, but to Emily each step felt infinitely long, marked by uncertainty and a fragile hope that she dared not acknowledge. James and Eleanor walked on either side of her, creating an unspoken shield of comfort. Emily glanced up occasionally, stealing curious looks at the couple whose presence radiated warmth, unlike anything she'd experienced in her short life. The closer they drew to the house, the more imposing and beautiful it became, standing majestically in the midst of vibrant fields and picturesque stables. Elizabeth, busy tending to the horses, glanced up from her work as she noticed her parents approaching with an unfamiliar child. Her eyes narrowed slightly in suspicion, curious about the girl whose appearance seemed oddly out of place. Wiping her hands on a rag, Elizabeth stepped toward them, curiosity evident in her poised movements. "Mum, Dad?" Elizabeth called, her voice cautious yet friendly. "Who's our visitor?" Eleanor smiled reassuringly at her daughter. "Elizabeth, this is Emily. We found her by the gate, cleaning it of all things. We thought we'd invite her inside for a bit." Elizabeth studied Emily quietly, her expression shifting to gentle amusement. "Cleaning the gate? Well, that's a new one." Emily glanced nervously between Elizabeth and her parents, unsure how to respond. She bit her lip, the tension palpable. Elizabeth immediately softened, sensing the child's discomfort. "Well, welcome, Emily," Elizabeth said warmly, kneeling slightly to be closer to her level. "I'm Elizabeth, but most people here just call me Liz. It's nice to meet you." Emily shyly offered a faint smile, her heart easing slightly. "Thank you." James gently placed his hand on Emily's shoulder, guiding her toward the house. Inside, Emily's wide eyes explored the spacious interior, filled with comfortable furniture, paintings depicting sprawling countryside landscapes, and family photographs adorning nearly every surface. Something about the portraits tugged at Emily's heart, filling her with a peculiar sense of longing. "Make yourself comfortable," Eleanor said, guiding Emily toward a cozy sitting area near a large window that overlooked the pasture. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" Emily hesitated, her stomach quietly growling in response. Eleanor smiled knowingly, patting her hand reassuringly. "I'll get you something to eat." As Eleanor walked toward the kitchen, James sat in an armchair opposite Emily, observing her quietly. His eyes softened as he saw her petite frame almost swallowed by the oversized sofa, emphasizing her vulnerability. Elizabeth stood beside her father, arms crossed thoughtfully as she studied the child more closely. Emily's eyes drifted nervously around the room, landing finally on a photograph perched upon the mantelpiece. It depicted a younger James and Eleanor, smiling happily, holding a small child close, barely older than Emily herself. Something about the image sent a sudden, inexplicable wave of sadness washing over her. "Who's that?" Emily asked softly, pointing timidly toward the photograph. James followed her gaze, his face briefly darkening with an old pain before quickly regaining composure. "That's our son Nathan," he replied quietly, his voice tinged with a lingering sorrow. "We lost him many years ago." Emily's eyes filled with empathy, feeling an unexpected connection to their loss. "I'm sorry," she whispered sincerely. James smiled faintly, moved by her sensitivity. "Thank you, Emily. He was very special to us." Eleanor returned, carrying a plate filled with fresh fruit, sandwiches, and a tall glass of cold milk. Emily's eyes widened gratefully, her mouth watering at the sight. She quietly began to eat, savoring every bite, unaware of how closely the Matthews family watched her with thoughtful, unreadable expressions. Unbeknownst to Emily, something in her gentle presence had ignited a long-dormant hope in James's heart, an inexplicable feeling that perhaps this chance encounter at the gate was not mere coincidence. It felt as though fate had quietly opened a door long thought permanently closed, and as James exchanged another meaningful glance with Eleanor, they both sensed their lives were about to shift in ways they could scarcely imagine. As Emily quietly finished her meal, the Matthews family discreetly exchanged glances filled with silent questions and unspoken emotions. Elizabeth, noticing the cautious looks between her parents, decided to break the silence, her voice gentle but direct. "Emily, where exactly are you staying?" Elizabeth asked carefully, sitting beside the young girl on the plush sofa. Her tone was comforting, a deliberate attempt to encourage Emily's honesty without making her feel threatened. Emily paused, placing her sandwich carefully back onto the plate. Her fingers nervously toyed with the edge of a napkin, and her eyes avoided Elizabeth's gaze as she contemplated how to answer. A sense of shame overwhelmed her, making it difficult to admit the truth of her lonely existence. "It's okay," Elizabeth prompted softly. "You can tell us." Taking a shaky breath, Emily finally spoke. "I'm staying at the foster home on Apple Street, but they don't really notice when I'm not there. Sometimes I leave and no one even knows." Her voice was barely audible, tinged with sadness and resignation. James's expression darkened, troubled by her words. Eleanor's eyes filled with empathy, heart aching at the thought of this gentle girl living in neglect and loneliness. She immediately sat beside Emily, placing an arm gently around her thin shoulders. Emily flinched slightly, surprised yet comforted by Eleanor's maternal warmth. "We're sorry you've had to go through that," Eleanor whispered tenderly. "No child should feel alone or forgotten." James leaned forward, elbows resting thoughtfully on his knees, eyes firmly set upon Emily. He was no longer seeing just a lost child sitting before him, but rather something more profound, a second chance at redemption for a past he could never fully forgive himself for. A gentle determination settled across his features as he spoke. "Emily, we can't allow you to go back there," James declared firmly yet kindly. "You deserve to be cared for, somewhere safe and loving." Emily's eyes widened in shock, disbelief clouding her expression. Could it be possible that these strangers genuinely cared for her well-being? Or was it simply pity, another fleeting gesture of kindness that would disappear as quickly as it arrived? "You'd really help me?" Emily's voice wavered uncertainly, vulnerability laid bare. Elizabeth squeezed Emily's hand reassuringly. "Of course, Emily. You came to our gate, but it feels like you were brought here for a reason." Emily blinked back tears, overwhelmed by an unfamiliar surge of hope. Could this ranch, with its warm-hearted family, finally become a true home? James glanced briefly toward Eleanor, exchanging a knowing look. In their eyes was an unspoken agreement, one that had formed swiftly yet felt inevitable. Eleanor smiled encouragingly at him, nodding once in affirmation. Turning back to Emily, James spoke gently, yet decisively. "Emily, we'd like you to stay with us, at least for now. We'll speak to the proper authorities and sort everything out." "How does that sound?" Emily's eyes brimmed with tears, her lower lip trembling as she struggled to believe the reality unfolding before her. She had spent countless nights dreaming of a family, of a home that welcomed her not out of obligation, but genuine affection. "I'd like that," she whispered softly, almost afraid to voice the wish aloud, lest it vanish into thin air. Eleanor hugged her gently, pulling the child closer as Elizabeth smiled warmly beside them. James sat quietly, watching the tender scene with a heart swelling with complex emotions. He felt both joy and a lingering sadness, haunted by a past tragedy he still could not fully confront. Yet Emily's presence had ignited a spark of healing, a gentle reassurance that perhaps fate was finally granting him a second chance. Unnoticed by anyone, Elizabeth's gaze drifted back toward the photograph on the mantelpiece, her expression briefly troubled by the mysterious similarity she saw between her late brother Nathan and the quiet girl sitting beside her parents. A strange suspicion formed within her, unsettling and yet impossible to dismiss entirely. She pushed it aside quickly, reminding herself that the past belonged where it was, behind them. Yet the silent whisper of unanswered questions persisted, hinting that their past and Emily's arrival might be connected in ways they could never have imagined. That evening, as twilight settled gently over Windmere Ranch, the Matthews family gathered quietly on the porch, watching as the stars emerged like tiny lanterns in the vast indigo sky. Emily sat nestled comfortably between Eleanor and Elizabeth, wrapped in a warm blanket, her small hands clutching a steaming mug of cocoa. The peace and security she felt in this moment were unlike anything she'd ever experienced, yet she remained hesitant, still wary that it could vanish without warning. James stood at the porch railing, his gaze distant, lost in quiet reflection. A heaviness hung around him, invisible yet unmistakable. Eleanor watched her husband carefully, recognizing the signs of his internal struggle. She had spent many nights witnessing his silent grief over their lost son, and understood how profoundly Emily's unexpected arrival had stirred painful memories and hidden hopes. "Emily," Elizabeth spoke softly, drawing the girl's attention. "Do you like horses?" Emily nodded eagerly, eyes brightening. "I love them," she whispered shyly, her voice still tinged with uncertainty. "I've always dreamed of seeing one up close." Elizabeth smiled warmly, sharing a tender glance with Eleanor. "Tomorrow we'll introduce you to a special horse named Stardust. She's gentle and kind. I think you two will get along beautifully." Emily's expression lit up with excitement, her heart swelling at the promise. She could hardly believe how quickly her life had shifted from loneliness to the comforting embrace of this newfound family. James listened to the exchange silently, his heart both buoyed and burdened by conflicting emotions. The echoes of loss and regret continued to reverberate inside him, amplified by Emily's presence. He turned his gaze back toward the distant hills, searching for a peace that eluded him. After a few quiet moments, Eleanor gently stood, placing a comforting hand on James's shoulder. "James, perhaps it's time we tell Emily about Nathan," she suggested softly, her voice filled with gentle urgency. James tensed slightly, his jaw tightening as the name struck his heart like an old wound reopened. Eleanor sensed his hesitation, squeezing his arm reassuringly. "It's important," Eleanor whispered firmly, her eyes full of compassion and understanding. "She deserves to know why we've welcomed her so quickly." James sighed deeply, finally nodding in agreement. He turned back to Emily, his expression gentle yet profoundly serious. "Emily, our son Nathan went missing almost 20 years ago. He was just a child then, barely older than you are now," James explained softly, voice trembling slightly with long-contained emotion. "We searched everywhere but never found him. It broke our hearts." Emily listened silently, eyes wide with sorrow and compassion. Her heart ached for their pain, yet confusion filled her as well. "I'm sorry," she whispered gently, reaching out to touch James's hand comfortingly. James took her small hand into his larger, worn one, his voice thick with restrained emotion. "When we saw you at the gate this morning, it reminded us of Nathan, his kindness, his quiet strength. You brought back memories we've long kept buried. We see something special in you, Emily, something we've been missing for far too long." Emily's heart raced, her eyes shimmering with tears. Was it possible that she had somehow filled the gap left by Nathan? Or was there more behind James's words, an unspoken secret, deeper and more profound? Suddenly, Elizabeth rose from her chair, pacing restlessly as she struggled with a growing sense of unease. She had kept silent until now, suppressing her suspicions, but she could no longer ignore the questions burning fiercely inside her. "Dad? Mom?" Elizabeth finally spoke, voice strained. "Doesn't anyone else see it? Emily isn't just similar to Nathan in spirit, and she even looks like him. What if—" Elizabeth paused, taking a deep breath before voicing her startling thought. What if Emily isn't just a random child? What if there's something we don't know, something more? James, Eleanor, and Emily turned sharply toward Elizabeth, their faces frozen in shocked silence. The night air grew tense, heavy with unspoken truths and unanswerable questions. Emily's heart pounded furiously, her gaze locking onto James's stunned face, suddenly terrified of what they might uncover. Could her arrival here truly be just a coincidence, or was she connected to their lost son in ways none of them could yet comprehend? The next morning dawned with a surreal stillness. Mist curled like whispered secrets over the Windermere fields, as the sun rose reluctantly, casting a soft golden hue over the ranch. Emily sat at the edge of her new bed, wrapped in a thick quilt, her eyes fixed on the window. She hadn't slept much. Elizabeth's words from the night before echoed in her mind like a haunting melody. What if there was something more? She pressed her palm against the glass, watching horses graze peacefully beyond the fences. In that moment, she didn't feel like an outsider. For the first time in her life, she felt as if she belonged, like the land, the sky, and even the creaking old house somehow knew her name. Downstairs, James sat at the kitchen table, a steaming mug untouched in his hands. Eleanor moved quietly around him, preparing breakfast, her expression taut with worry. Elizabeth stood by the back door, arms crossed, staring out toward the stables. "Liz," Eleanor said softly, "are you sure we shouldn't let it go?" Elizabeth turned, her voice steady but low. "Mom, I can't ignore it. There's something in her eyes. I see Nathan." James looked up sharply. The name still struck him like thunder. "That's impossible," he said, though even he didn't sound convinced. "I know how it sounds," Elizabeth continued, walking over to the table. "But don't you think it's strange? Her features, her instincts, the way she found us. We need to know more." James rubbed his forehead. "You think she's Nathan's daughter?" Eleanor gasped, the thought spoken aloud finally giving shape to the storm swirling silently around them. Elizabeth nodded solemnly. "I think it's possible. And if it is, she has a right to know who she is." Upstairs, Emily changed into the clean clothes Eleanor had left for her. They fit better than anything she'd worn before. Soft jeans, a cotton shirt, and a small pair of boots, still slightly too big. She pulled her hair into a messy ponytail and made her way downstairs. When she entered the kitchen, the room fell silent. The three adults looked up at once. Emily felt the weight of their stares and offered a timid smile. "Good morning," she said. Eleanor quickly recovered, her warmth breaking the tension. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Emily nodded, sensing something unspoken lingering in the air. James stood and pulled out a chair beside him. "Come sit. We'd like to talk to you about something important." Emily sat slowly, her hands resting in her lap. Elizabeth took a seat across from her, her expression kind but serious. James leaned forward, his voice low. "Emily, have you ever known anything about your parents? Anything at all?" Emily blinked, confused by the question. "No. I was told they died in a car accident when I was very little. I don't remember them." Eleanor reached out and gently touched her hand. "Do you remember your last name?" Emily hesitated. No one ever told me. They always just called me Emily. Elizabeth's breath caught. James glanced at his wife and daughter, then back at Emily. Emily, would you mind taking a small DNA test, just to see if there's any connection? Emily looked between them all, heart pounding. You think I'm related to you? Elizabeth nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. We think you might be Nathan's daughter. Emily stared at them, frozen as if the air had been sucked from the room. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, Nathan's daughter, but she'd never known him. How could that be true? I don't understand, she said quietly, her voice shaking. James leaned forward, his eyes steady and calm. Neither do we, Emily, but there are too many coincidences. You being here, the way you look, the timing. We just need to know the truth. Eleanor slid a small plastic kit onto the table. It's just a simple swab. We won't do anything unless you're comfortable. You can say no, and that's okay. Emily looked at the kit, her fingers trembling. Somewhere deep inside her, a flicker of longing stirred. She had never known who she was, where she came from. Could this be the answer to questions she didn't even know she had? She looked at each of their faces, James, Eleanor, Elizabeth. None of them pushed her. All three watched her with quiet hope. And something else, tenderness. A tenderness she had only ever dreamed of receiving from someone who might truly care about her. I want to know too, she said at last, barely above a whisper. Eleanor exhaled, relief softening her face. All right then, sweetheart. We'll take the sample today and send it off. It might take a few days to get results. James gently opened the kit and handed Emily the cotton swab. With shaking hands, she followed the instructions, swabbing the inside of her cheek before sealing the sample carefully. James wrote her name on the envelope. Emily, possible match, Nathan Matthews, before sealing it shut. Elizabeth took the envelope in hand. I'll take this into town myself, overnight it to the lab. We should hear back by the end of the week. Emily nodded slowly. Thank you. Of course, James said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. No matter what the results say, you have a place here with us. His words struck her heart with more power than he could have known. A place, belonging. For a girl who had spent her life drifting, that meant everything. Later that morning, Elizabeth drove off toward town with the envelope in the passenger seat, her thoughts racing. She couldn't shake the image of Emily beside the gate, nor the uncanny familiarity she'd felt from the moment they'd locked eyes. Deep in her gut, she felt certain. This child wasn't just someone Nathan might have known. She was family. Back at the ranch, James took Emily to the stables, introducing her to Stardust, the mare he had raised for years. The moment Emily stepped into the stall, Stardust nuzzled against her, as though they were already old friends. James watched in quiet amazement. Horses were often cautious with strangers, but Stardust had gone directly to her. How you have a gentle soul, James said, watching Emily stroke the mare's neck. Animals sense that. Emily smiled faintly. I've always loved animals. They never expect you to be anyone but who you are. James nodded, the truth in her words hitting him deeply. You remind me of Nathan, he said softly, unable to stop himself. He was like that too. Emily didn't know what to say. She simply continued brushing Stardust, letting the rhythm calm her racing thoughts. Somewhere inside her a strange feeling grew. She didn't know where it came from, but it felt like recognition, like something dormant had been quietly waking up. The days that followed were filled with quiet anticipation. Emily settled into the rhythms of life on the ranch, as though she had always belonged there. She helped Eleanor in the kitchen, rode alongside Elizabeth to check on the herd, and spent long afternoons brushing Stardust, her favorite companion. The connection between her and the mare only deepened, drawing curious glances from the ranch hands, who swore they'd never seen Stardust so calm. Each evening the family gathered around the dinner table, their conversations growing warmer, their laughter more frequent. And though no one said it aloud, they all felt it. Emily was becoming a part of them. but with each passing hour, the weight of the DNA test loomed larger. On the third night, Emily found herself in the study, drawn by the same photograph that had captured her attention that first day. She stared again at the image of a younger James and Eleanor with their son, Nathan. His hair was tousled like hers, his eyes wide and curious. A sense of déjà vu washed over her, and she touched the edge of the frame gently. "You look like him." James's voice came softly from behind her. Emily turned, startled, but he offered a gentle smile. "I used to sit in this room after Nathan disappeared," he continued, walking slowly to stand beside her. "Every night I'd look at this photo and wonder if I'd ever see him again. Not a day went by that I didn't pray for some kind of sign." Emily looked up at him. "Do you think I'm that sign?" James hesitated, his voice thick. "I don't know, but I do know that you being here, it feels like more than chance." He walked over to a drawer in the desk and pulled out a weathered envelope. "These are some of Nathan's old things," he said, handing it to her. "Maybe you'd like to look." Emily opened the envelope slowly. Inside were old drawings, childlike sketches of horses, trees, and barns. One stood out, a drawing of the ranch gate. It was nearly identical to what she had scrubbed clean that first morning. Her heart raced. "He drew this?" James nodded. "He loved that gate. Said it was the place where all good things started." Emily traced the lines of the drawing, overwhelmed. "I've dreamed of this gate before. I thought it was just in my imagination, but when I found it, it felt like I'd already been here." James looked at her, emotion rising in his throat. Maybe you had." The moment was heavy, charged with something neither could name. The following morning, as the sun broke across the fields, a delivery truck pulled into the long gravel driveway. Elizabeth, returning from the barn, paused as the driver handed her a small envelope. It was from the lab. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her breath catching when she read the results. She read them again and again, heart pounding in her chest. She turned toward the house and ran. Inside, Emily sat at the table with Eleanor, peeling apples for a pie. The door burst open. Elizabeth stood breathless, eyes wide. "What is it?" James asked, rising from his chair. Elizabeth held out the envelope with both hands, her voice a whisper. "She's Nathan's daughter." The room went still. Eleanor dropped the knife she was using to slice apples, her hands trembling. James stood frozen, staring at Elizabeth as if she had just spoken a foreign language. Emily looked from one face to the next, trying to process what she had just heard. Elizabeth stepped forward, voice steadier now but still laced with awe. "The DNA test confirmed it. There's no doubt. Emily is Nathan's daughter." Emily's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her heart thundered in her chest. "But how? I never knew him. I never knew anything about him." James lowered himself slowly back into the chair, his hands covering his face as a soft, broken sob escaped him. Eleanor rushed to his side, kneeling and holding him tightly. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the years of sorrow, grief, and unanswered prayers finally began to unravel. "My son," she whispered. "He had a daughter. He had a child." Emily sat motionless, overwhelmed by a surge of emotions she couldn't name. Confusion, joy, fear, and longing all collided inside her. "I don't understand," she said again, her voice shaking. "Where was he? What happened to him?" James looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "We don't know, Emily. Nathan disappeared when he was 20. We searched for him for years. There were rumors as maybe he'd joined a commune or left the country, but no one could prove anything. We thought he might be dead." Elizabeth sat down across from Emily, gently taking her hands. "But he wasn't. He must have started a new life somewhere, and somewhere along the way he had you." Eleanor wiped her tears and rose, walking slowly to Emily and cupping her face in both hands. "You are our granddaughter," she said softly, her voice full of wonder. "You're our family." Emily felt a sob break loose in her chest, and before she could speak, Eleanor pulled her into a warm, trembling embrace. James joined them, wrapping his arms around both, holding them as if afraid the moment would slip away. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees as if nature itself acknowledged the powerful shift that had just taken place. Later that afternoon, the family gathered in the living room, trying to piece together the fragments of Nathan's lost story. Emily sat curled beside Eleanor, her small hand still clutching the DNA results. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We need to find out what happened to him, where he went, how he died. If you ended up in the foster system, Emily, something went terribly wrong. Elizabeth nodded. There might be records, hospital files, old addresses, maybe something in the state archives. If we find where Emily was born, we might be able to trace it back. Emily looked up. I remember a woman with dark hair, not a mother exactly. I think she took care of me after my parents died, but she was always tired, always afraid. I don't even remember her name. Elizabeth's brows furrowed. That's something, it's a start. Eleanor spoke softly. No matter what we uncover, you're with us now and we will never let you go. Emily nodded, her throat too tight to speak. A piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, but the biggest question still loomed. What had happened to Nathan Matthews, and why had no one known he had a daughter until now? The next few days passed in a blur of quiet revelations and rising determination. James contacted every old friend, investigator, and even former employees who had worked the ranch during Nathan's youth. Elizabeth scoured digital archives, searching through death certificates, marriage records, and abandoned addresses tied to her brother's name. Meanwhile, Emily remained close to Eleanor, who taught her how to bake, sew, and tend to the garden, small acts that stitched their bond tighter with each passing moment. But under the warmth of this growing family, a storm brewed just out of sight. On the fourth day, Elizabeth made a breakthrough. She burst into the study, laptop in hand, where James and Eleanor sat reviewing old photographs with Emily. I found something, Elizabeth said, excitement laced with caution. She set the laptop on the desk, pulling up a scanned hospital record dated 11 years ago. Nathan James Matthews, entered under the alias Nathan Hale. Patient at Cedar Pines Community Hospital. James leaned in, his eyes narrowing. That's 3 states away. Elizabeth nodded. He was admitted for internal injuries. No contact listed. But here's the thing. He was discharged 2 weeks later and never returned. That's the last record of him. Emily leaned over the edge of the desk, her eyes fixed on the screen. So he was alive then? That was after I was born. Yes, Elizabeth confirmed. Which means he could have still been alive when you were very young. James ran a hand over his face, the weight of new questions piling onto old ones. And then he disappeared again, just like before. Do you think he was running from something? Emily asked softly. No one answered at first. Then Eleanor said quietly, or someone. They all stared at one another, the implications heavy. Was Nathan hiding to protect himself or to protect Emily? Elizabeth took a breath. There's more. Cedar Pines is near a small town called Shadewood. It's not far from where Emily's foster home was registered. That can't be a coincidence. James stood, a fire now lit in his eyes. Then that's where we go, tomorrow. Eleanor touched his arm gently. Are you sure? He nodded. If Nathan spent his final years there, we need to know why, and how Emily ended up in the system instead of with us. The next morning, James, Elizabeth, and Emily set off in the truck, the landscape shifting from golden plains to forested hills as they neared Shadewood. The town was small, quiet, and somewhat forgotten by time. They stopped first at the town clerk's office, then the library, then finally, reluctantly, at the hospital. The receptionist searched old digital files and shook her head. I'm sorry, those records are sealed. The patient listed no next of kin. James clenched his jaw. He was my son. The receptionist hesitated. I can call the director, but it might take some time. As they stepped outside to wait, Emily wandered a few feet away toward a nearby bench. Her eyes landed on a small plaque in a garden near the hospital entrance. In memory of Nathan Hale, beloved friend and father. She froze. Dad, she called out. James and Elizabeth rushed over, and when they saw it, their breath caught. Erected beneath a tree was a simple memorial. No headstone, no dates, just a name and those few words. "He died here," Emily whispered, tears rising fast. "He's gone." James stared at the plaque, emotion threatening to crush him. He was so close, and we never knew. But just as the truth began to settle, a soft voice behind them said, "You're looking for Nathan." They turned to see an older woman standing nearby, her eyes dark and searching. She stepped closer, gaze fixed on Emily. "I knew him. I took care of his daughter after he passed. Until she was taken away." Her eyes locked onto Emily's and a chill passed through the air. "You're her, aren't you?" the woman whispered. "You're the girl he died trying to protect." The silence that followed the woman's words was deafening. Emily stood motionless, her breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding against her ribs like it was trying to escape. James stepped protectively in front of her, his eyes narrowing as he studied the stranger. Elizabeth's hand gently touched Emily's shoulder, grounding her as emotions swirled. "Who are you?" James asked, voice calm but firm. The woman's expression softened. "My name is Margaret Hale. I was a nurse here, and Nathan's friend. He used my last name during his stay to stay hidden. He didn't want anyone finding him, not even you, I think." James flinched but said nothing. Margaret's gaze drifted to Emily. "He came in badly hurt. Refused to say what happened, but I could tell. He wasn't just running from life, he was hiding from someone, protecting something. Or someone." Emily's voice came out small, barely a whisper. "Me?" Margaret nodded slowly. "He never said your name, never showed a photo, but I remember him sitting by the window in the recovery room, talking to someone who wasn't there. I'll keep you safe, Emmy. I promise." She paused, her eyes glistening. "It haunted him, not being able to stay with you. He said if something happened to him, he wanted you far from the people who hurt your mother." Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice tight. "What happened to her?" Margaret shook her head. "I don't know the details, only that she died before Nathan got here. He was broken, terrified. After he passed, I tried to care for the little girl he left behind, but someone from the state came, took her without warning." James's hands clenched at his sides. "And no one contacted us?" "They didn't know who to contact," Margaret said quietly. "Nathan erased everything. He made sure no names were traceable. He said it was safer that way. All I had was a first name, Emily." The weight of it crashed down on them, how close they had been, how easily it could have been different. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. "He loved me. Even if I don't remember, he tried to protect me." Margaret stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "He loved you more than life, child. He was terrified of what would happen if they found you. I still don't know who he meant. He never said." James looked to Elizabeth, a silent understanding passing between them. There were still missing pieces. Someone, perhaps more than one, had wanted Nathan and Emily hidden. Or gone. Elizabeth's voice broke the silence. "Do you know where he was living before he came here?" Margaret nodded. "There's a cabin, about 5 miles from here. Deep in the woods near Clearwater Creek. He said it was the only place he ever felt safe." James didn't hesitate. "Take us there," Margaret agreed, retrieving her coat and keys. As they drove deeper into the forest, winding through narrow dirt paths and overgrown trails, Emily stared out the window, her thoughts spinning. Every answer brought more questions, but she wasn't scared anymore. Not here, not with them. And deep inside, she felt something else, like a voice in her heart she hadn't heard in years, whispering the same words Nathan once had. "I'll keep you safe, Emmy. I promise." The truck bounced gently along the forest path as the trees thickened and sunlight filtered through the leaves in thin golden streams. Emily sat between James and Elizabeth in the front seat, while Margaret followed behind in her rusted old sedan. The air smelled of pine, moss, and something older, something untouched by time. As they turned a final bend, the cabin came into view. It was small, weathered, and half covered by climbing ivy. The roof sagged in the middle, but the structure stood firm, rooted like it had always belonged there. A rusted wind chime clinked softly on the porch, disturbed by the passing breeze. It was quiet, so quiet that even the birds seemed to hush in reverence. James cut the engine and stepped out, his boots crunching softly on the earth. He moved slowly, reverently, like approaching sacred ground. Elizabeth followed close behind, her face unreadable. Emily hesitated for a moment before climbing down, her eyes fixed on the worn wooden door ahead. "This is where he lived," she whispered. Margaret nodded as she stepped out of her car. "For nearly a year. I brought him supplies when I could. After he died, I never had the heart to come back." James walked up the porch steps and reached for the doorknob. It turned easily, creaking as the door opened inward. Inside, the air was still. Dust floated through streaks of light, but everything remained in place, as if Nathan had only just stepped out and might return at any moment. A small table sat in the center of the single room, covered in papers, faded photographs and notebooks. A narrow bed lay neatly made against one wall, with a child's blanket folded carefully at its foot. There was a shelf of books, and in the corner a small trunk with a brass latch. Emily stepped inside slowly, her hand brushing the edge of the table. Her eyes fell on a drawing, one she didn't remember making, yet somehow recognized. A stick-figure girl with a horse standing by a large gate. The word Emily was scribbled underneath. Elizabeth picked up a notebook, flipping through the pages. Her expression shifted from confusion to awe. "These are letters," she murmured. "All of them." "Written to you, Emily." Emily's eyes widened. "To me?" James leaned over, reading aloud one of the entries. "October 4th. Emmy, I miss your laugh. I hope you still laugh the same way. I hope you still love horses, and that you find kind people who see your light. I'll find a way back to you, I promise." His voice faltered, thick with emotion. Eleanor stepped into the cabin then, having followed quietly behind. Her hands flew to her mouth as she took it all in. "He never gave up on her," she whispered, "even in hiding." Emily opened the trunk in the corner and gasped. Inside were toys, simple, hand-carved animals, a small stuffed horse, and clothes too small for an adult. There was also a faded photograph of Nathan holding a baby wrapped in a pink blanket. His face was tired, bruised, but his smile, it was pure joy. Elizabeth knelt beside Emily, placing a hand on her back. "That's you," she said softly. Emily picked up the photo, holding it close, tears running freely down her cheeks. "He really did love me." "Yes," James said, his voice trembling. "More than anything." But as they stood together in the tiny cabin, filled with so much love and sorrow, a sound shattered the quiet. A car engine, then another. James moved quickly to the door, peering through the cracks in the wood. Two black SUVs rolled slowly down the narrow path, stopping just beyond the clearing. Men in dark suits stepped out. Elizabeth's voice was sharp with fear. "Who are they?" Margaret's face went pale. "I don't know, Ed, but that's not the state." James closed the door softly, locking it. "Get away from the windows," he said quietly. Emily's fingers tightened around the photo in her hands. Something that had been buried deep beneath years of silence had just awakened, and someone out there didn't want it found. James pulled the curtain shut and backed away from the window, his movements precise and deliberate. Elizabeth instinctively guided Emily behind a cabinet, shielding her with her body. Eleanor took Margaret's arm and led her toward the kitchen corner, where the shadows were deepest. Outside, car doors slammed shut. The sound of crunching footsteps echoed ominously through the trees as the suited men approached the cabin. Their voices were muffled, but urgent, like they were searching for something or someone. James turned to Elizabeth. "Check the back window. See if we have another way out." Elizabeth crept toward the rear of the cabin, her eyes scanning the woods beyond the narrow glass. "There's a path, but it's overgrown. It'll be tight." "Then that's our escape," James said. "If they try to come in, we go out the back." Emily clutched the photo of Nathan tighter, heart racing in her chest. "Why are they here?" she whispered. Margaret's voice trembled. "I think they're the ones he was hiding from." Eleanor looked sharply at her. Who are they, Margaret? Tell us what you know. Now. Margaret hesitated, eyes darting toward the front door. I wasn't sure before, but I think they're private contractors, not from the government. Worse. Nathan mentioned them once near the end. He said they were connected to something he'd uncovered when he was younger. A corporate group, something involving land grabs. He was afraid they'd hurt Emmy to silence him. Elizabeth's eyes widened. You're saying this is about Windmere Ranch? I don't know, Margaret said quickly. But Nathan was terrified. He said something was buried, a truth. He died before he could tell me what. James's face was pale but composed. If they want to hurt Emily, they won't get the chance. Suddenly, a knock at the front door. Firm. 3 slow beats. Everyone froze. A voice called out from the other side. Male. Calm. Chillingly polite. Mr. Matthews, we know you're in there. We're here to collect something that belongs to us. James moved forward, but stopped just before the door. You have the wrong place, he called back. Another pause. We know the girl is with you. Elizabeth let out a soft gasp. Emily clung tighter to the photo, her breathing shallow. The voice continued, still smooth, unnervingly cordial. This isn't about hurting anyone. We just want the girl. She has something our employer considers sensitive. James's face darkened. She's a child. She's a key, the voice replied. Before James could respond, there was a thud, then another. They were trying to break down the door. James turned quickly. Now, out the back, go! Elizabeth grabbed Emily's hand and pushed open the back window. It creaked loudly, but they didn't stop. One by one, they climbed out into the dense underbrush, the sound of splintering wood behind them growing louder with each heartbeat. As they ran into the forest, Margaret leading the way, James turned once to glance back at the cabin, his son's final sanctuary. Smoke began to rise from the porch. They're burning it, Eleanor cried. They're destroying everything. No, James said, eyes fixed on the flames. They're trying to erase him. Emily stumbled briefly, but Elizabeth caught her, pulling her close. We've got you. Keep moving. Through the trees the family ran, guided only by instinct and desperation. Whatever truth Nathan had died to protect, whatever secret still lived inside Emily, they had just been given a brutal warning. Someone would do anything to keep it hidden. The forest thickened around them as they fled, tree branches clawing at their arms and the undergrowth snagging at their clothes. The distant glow of fire lit the sky behind them, a burning reminder that someone powerful, ruthless, and invisible had now entered their lives. Emily struggled to keep up, but Elizabeth never let go of her hand. James led the way with relentless urgency, Margaret following close behind with Eleanor, whose breath came in sharp, frightened bursts. Every few steps, James would glance over his shoulder, searching the shadows for signs of pursuit. Eventually, they broke into a small clearing beside a dried-up creek bed. The group collapsed momentarily, gasping for breath. Emily sank to the ground, the photo of Nathan still clutched to her chest like armor. Are they following? Eleanor asked, barely able to speak. James scanned the tree line. I don't think so. They're not chasing. They were there to destroy, erase, not capture. Not yet. Elizabeth sat beside Emily, brushing dirt from her face. We have to go to the police, the media, somebody. No, Margaret said quickly, voice urgent. If Nathan was right, these people own parts of both. They'll spin it, bury it. Elizabeth looked at her sharply. Then what, we just keep running? James looked at the group, his eyes grave. No, we fight. The others stared at him, unsure whether he was serious or simply pushed beyond reason. But James was calm, focused. I don't know who they are or what exactly they're hiding, he continued. But I know they're afraid of Emily. That means she matters. That means Nathan died protecting something they still haven't buried. And I won't let them take her. Margaret nodded slowly. There may still be something left at the hospital. Nathan gave me a box before he died, said to keep it hidden. I never opened it. Why not? Eleanor asked. Because I was afraid, she whispered. I thought if I ignored it, the danger would stay away, but now... Emily looked up, her eyes filled with a quiet courage no child should have to carry. We need to see it. Margaret took a breath, then nodded. I hid it in the old chapel near the hospital. No one goes there anymore. If it's still there, it might have answers. Elizabeth helped Emily to her feet. Then that's where we go. As they retraced their path through the woods toward the outer road, Emily walked silently, her hand now firmly gripping Elizabeth's. James moved close beside her, like a wall between her and the darkness still chasing them. Margaret led them toward the edge of the woods. The chapel's about a mile from here, she said. We'll cut through the old cemetery. It'll be faster. They emerged from the trees onto a narrow, overgrown path leading toward Shadewood's forgotten graveyard. Moss-covered stones leaned at odd angles, and the chapel rose like a ghost among the thorns and ivy. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. Margaret stepped past the altar, lifting a loose stone tile. Beneath it lay a small tin box wrapped in an old cloth. She handed it to James with trembling hands. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside were several folded documents, an old cassette tape, and a photograph. The image showed a group of suited men standing beside a survey map, marked with Windermere Region Experimental Land Use, Project 17. James felt the blood drain from his face. What is this? Elizabeth asked. James held up the photo. This is Windermere, our ranch, and those men, some of them are politicians, businessmen. The ranch was part of something Nathan uncovered. Emily looked at the cassette. What's on the tape? James stared at it for a long moment. I don't know yet, he said. But whatever it is, Nathan died to protect it. They returned to the Matthews truck, hidden on the far side of the woods, just as the horizon began to dim. The sky, once lit by the glow of the burning cabin, now melted into hues of deep purple and navy. Emily sat quietly in the back seat, her eyes fixed on the tin box resting in her lap. She hadn't spoken much since they'd left the chapel, but her mind was ablaze with questions, images, and a heaviness she didn't yet know how to carry. James drove in silence, his grip on the steering wheel tight, knuckles white. Beside him, Eleanor held the photo of the Windermere land map, her lips pressed in a thin line. Elizabeth sat in the back with Emily, occasionally glancing at her, wanting to comfort but unsure how. They arrived at Windermere Ranch well past dark. Most of the hands had gone home. Only the porch light remained on, casting a golden glow that beckoned like a beacon. Inside, James placed the tin box gently on the table. We need to hear that tape, he said. Elizabeth found an old cassette player in the attic. They gathered around as she inserted the tape, pressing the play button with a quiet click. A man's voice filled the room, calm, steady, unmistakably Nathan's. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. Emily flinched, her eyes wide. They're called Project 17, a private syndicate, shielded by legal loopholes and paid officials. It started with land experiments, agriculture, water control. But then they got greedy. Windermere was their next target. James's hand clenched. They offered me money to keep quiet when I found the documents, but it wasn't just money they were hiding. They were planning to use ranch lands for testing, water diversions, soil manipulation. People were going to get hurt. I ran. I took Emmy and I ran. Eleanor began to cry. If I didn't survive, it's because they found me. Please protect my daughter. She's innocent. She's the only thing in this world I did right. The tape crackled, then ended. The room was silent. Emily looked up, voice trembling. He knew he wouldn't survive. He knew they'd come for him. James rose slowly, walking to the window, staring out at the moonlit fields. We've been sitting on stolen land, he said, used as a front for something dark. We didn't even know. Elizabeth stood beside him. But now we do, and we have proof. We need to go public, Eleanor whispered. James turned back to them. No, first we make copies, every document, every image. We send it to news stations, attorneys, anyone we can trust. Then we go to the state. Emily hugged the tin box close. He didn't die for nothing. No, James said, his voice hardening. He died a hero. As they began scanning the documents, Emily noticed something else at the bottom of the box, a smaller envelope addressed in faded handwriting. To Emmy, for when you're ready. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a necklace, a tiny charm shaped like a horse, delicate and hand-carved, hung from a slender silver chain. There was also a note. My beautiful girl. If you found this, it means you're safe. And that means I did what I had to do. Never doubt who you are. You come from love, from courage, from the kind of fight that never gives up. This necklace was your mother's. She'd want you to have it. Wear it and remember that no matter what they take, your spirit, our truth, those can't be erased. Love always, Dad. Tears slipped down Emily's cheeks as she fastened the necklace around her neck. Outside, the wind howled gently through the trees. Inside, a girl who had once felt like no one finally knew exactly who she was. But in the shadows beyond the hills, the men in suits were already preparing their next move. They hadn't come this far to let the truth come out. The next morning, Windmere Ranch was no longer just a place of healing. It had become a battlefield. James, Elizabeth, and Eleanor worked tirelessly at the dining table, converting the living room into a makeshift command center. The tin box sat open among stacks of copied documents, digital files, and photographs. Elizabeth had scanned every page, uploaded them to secure drives, and sent copies to contacts in the press, legal circles, and even an old friend of Nathan's who once worked in investigative journalism. Emily sat quietly nearby, observing everything. Her necklace rested over her heart, the weight of it grounding her as new strength settled into her small frame. For the first time, she didn't feel like an orphan. She felt like a legacy. Emails sent. Backups encrypted, Elizabeth said, closing her laptop. If they want to stop us, they'll need to erase half the internet. James nodded, still flipping through an old survey report Nathan had marked in red ink. These guys played a long game, moved in slowly, funded research under fake names, planted people in local government, and then targeted Windmere. Eleanor placed a cup of tea in front of him. They must have known Nathan could expose them. They knew, James said grimly. And when he didn't cooperate, they tried to bury him and everything he knew. Emily's voice was quiet but steady. But they didn't bury me. James looked at her with something close to awe. No, they didn't. Suddenly, a knock at the door. The entire family froze. Elizabeth reached for her phone, ready to call the sheriff. James approached the door slowly, looking through the peephole. It's Sheriff Langston, he said, confused. He opened the door to find the aging sheriff standing stiffly, his hat in hand, his expression unreadable. Morning, James, Langston said. Sheriff, James nodded. Something wrong? Langston cleared his throat, casting a glance past James into the house. I got a call this morning. State investigators asked if I knew anything about a girl named Emily and some old land records tied to Windmere. James's body tensed. What did you tell them? Nothing, Langston replied. Because I haven't seen anything yet. Elizabeth stepped into view. You're here because you want to help or because they sent you? Langston looked her in the eye. I'm here because I knew Nathan Matthews, and I always felt something was off about his disappearance. The case was sealed faster than it should have been. He stepped inside, lowering his voice. If what you've got is real, if Nathan was right, you need to move fast. You've stirred a hornet's nest. James motioned him inside. We've sent the files out. It's too late for them to stop it now. Langston nodded, but his face was grim. Then they'll come after something else, something closer. Everyone looked at Emily. Eleanor stepped protectively beside her. They won't touch her. They might try, Langston warned. You need protection. More than what I can offer. Elizabeth raised her phone. I've already contacted a journalist. He's on his way from the city. Langston nodded slowly. Then let's make sure you all live long enough to tell him the truth. Outside, clouds began to gather, casting long shadows over the hills. Storms were coming. But inside Windmere, a family once torn apart was preparing to stand together, no matter the cost. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened to a brooding grey. The air carried a heavy stillness, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Emily sat at the upstairs window, watching as the wind bent the tall grass in slow, swirling waves. In her hand, she held Nathan's drawing of the Windmere Gate. She traced the lines with her finger, feeling closer to him than ever. Downstairs, preparations continued. James and Sheriff Langston walked the perimeter of the ranch, checking gates, securing the barn, and speaking with a few trusted ranch hands who had agreed to stay and help. Elizabeth coordinated with journalists over encrypted video calls, sharing the story piece by piece, while carefully avoiding the attention of anyone outside their tight circle. Inside the kitchen, Eleanor packed a bag of essentials, food, clothes, flashlights, while keeping one eye on the clock. "We should have heard from them by now," she murmured. Elizabeth joined her, eyes tired but alert. "They said 2 hours. It's only been 1.5. If something happened..." Before she could finish, a text alert lit up her screen. "En route, 20 minutes. Mark C." She sighed in relief. "He's coming." Eleanor nodded, then glanced toward the stairs. "Emily hasn't said much today." Elizabeth looked up, concerned. "She's processing. Everything's happened so fast. I worry it's too much," Eleanor said softly. "For any child, let alone one who's already carried so much alone." "She's not alone anymore," Elizabeth said firmly. Meanwhile, Emily descended the stairs, still holding the drawing. Her face was calm but focused. "I want to help." James, returning from outside, overheard her. "You already are, Emmy." "I mean more than watching," she insisted. "I want to know everything. I want to know what Nathan found, why it mattered." Elizabeth knelt in front of her, eye to eye. "You're brave, just like your dad, but knowing everything, it might be scary." "I've been scared before," Emily replied. "That didn't stop me." James smiled faintly, pride flickering in his eyes. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "All right, let's show you." They gathered around the table again. James spread out a copy of the old land survey, the one marked with red circles and notes in Nathan's handwriting. "Nathan discovered these files buried in a local records office," James explained. "Windmere and several other ranches were marked for something called Project 17. The documents say it was for agricultural research, crop testing, water management, but the files Nathan found say otherwise." He tapped one line of text. "This mentions Class 3 chemical field testing, unregulated." Emily blinked. "What does that mean?" Elizabeth's tone turned bitter. "It means illegal. Dangerous substances, tested in rural areas to avoid attention. Nathan figured out that Windmere was chosen because of its isolation, and because the landowners could be persuaded." Eleanor added, "But we were never approached. James bought Windmere with clean funds. If someone tried to use it later, they did it behind our backs." Emily looked down at the survey. "So Nathan wasn't just running from danger, he was trying to stop it." "Yes," James said, "and now it's up to us." Suddenly, headlights appeared at the end of the long driveway. Elizabeth peered out the window. "It's Mark." Everyone stood. Emily's fingers tightened around the drawing. This wasn't just her family's fight anymore. It was her father's unfinished story, and now it was hers. Mark Chandler, the journalist Elizabeth had contacted, stepped out of the car with the cautious energy of someone who knew too well what stories like this could cost. He was tall, mid-40s, dressed in a well-worn blazer, messenger bag slung across his shoulder. His eyes scanned the ranch as he approached, pausing at the gate with its freshly scrubbed iron letters, Windmere, before continuing up the path. James met him halfway. "Mark?" "James Matthews." Mark extended his hand. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest." James offered a tight nod. "We're ready." Inside, introductions were brief. Mark's eyes never stopped moving, cataloguing details, reading expressions. When he spotted Emily, he hesitated slightly, his face softening. "You must be Emily," he said gently. "You look just like him." Emily tilted her head. "Did you know my dad?" "I met him once," Mark said, his voice dipping. "He was sharp, angry, driven, said he had something big but wasn't ready to share. Then he disappeared." When I heard your name in Liz's message, I knew. They moved to the dining table, where Elizabeth handed over the tin box and digital files. Mark combed through the documents quickly, murmuring under his breath as he read key sections aloud. Private syndicate, Class 3 chemical field tests, falsified land purchases, buried court orders. My God! James filled in the blanks as Mark absorbed the evidence. He told him about the cabin, the fire, the men in black SUVs, and Nathan's cassette. Mark's eyes grew wider with each revelation, but he said nothing until he finished scanning the last document. This, he said slowly, is more than a scandal. It's a conspiracy. We need to publish it, Elizabeth said. Now. I will, Mark promised. But this story will bring heat, big heat. They'll come after anyone who helped expose it. Let them, James said. We're not afraid anymore. Emily sat quietly beside them, then asked softly, Will people believe us? Mark turned to her. They will, especially when they hear your father's voice, and yours. Her eyes widened. Me? You're the center of this story, he said. You're why Nathan risked everything, why they burned his cabin. They wanted you to disappear. Instead, you came home. Emily looked to James and Eleanor. They nodded gently. Okay, she said, barely above a whisper. I'll talk. Mark smiled, placing a small recorder on the table. Whenever you're ready. Emily took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and began. My name is Emily. I'm 10 years old. And I'm Nathan Matthews' daughter. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. She told the story of growing up lost, of finding the gate, of cleaning it each morning without knowing why. She spoke of kindness, of belonging, of a picture on a mantle that felt like home before she knew what home was. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Mark clicked off the recorder. That was brave. Emily nodded. My dad was brave. I just want people to know the truth. James placed a hand on her back. They will. Suddenly, Sheriff Langston's truck skidded into the driveway, headlights blaring. He burst through the front door seconds later. They're back, he said breathlessly. 2 more SUVs, heading this way, and they've got company. Mark stiffened. They know I'm here. James turned to his family. Get to the storm cellar now. Elizabeth grabbed the laptop, Emily grabbed the tin box, and Eleanor took James's hand. But just before they moved, Emily stopped, looking at the portrait of Nathan once more. They tried to erase him, she whispered. They won't erase me. The storm cellar beneath the barn was cramped, its walls lined with old tools and canned goods. A single bulb flickered from the low ceiling, casting long shadows across the faces gathered there. Emily sat on a wooden crate, clutching the tin box against her chest, while Eleanor wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Elizabeth stood by the small grated window near the ceiling, peering through the slats. I see them, she whispered. 2 black SUVs, same kind, parked by the front gate. James stood near the door, a heavy wrench in hand. They'll search the house first. They don't know we've moved down here. Mark paced the length of the cellar, the light catching the sharp angles of his face. They'll be watching for any broadcast. If we send out the story now, we paint a target on everyone in this room. Then we wait, James asked. Let them dig up more lies? No, Mark said. We prepare it all, every file, the audio, Emily's statement, but we don't release it until we're safe. Emily looked up. Safe won't come by waiting. They won't stop until we make them. Eleanor placed a steady hand on the girl's back. Your father would be proud. Suddenly, a loud creak above their heads. Footsteps. Everyone froze. Mark grabbed his phone, silently typing a message. If they find the entrance, I'm sending the files to 5 journalists across the country, no more hiding. Elizabeth joined him, helping to attach the encrypted drives to his email. James motioned for silence. The footsteps above were slow, methodical. Someone was checking each board, perhaps sensing something hidden beneath. Emily's heart pounded in her ears. She remembered the words on Nathan's tape, his plea to keep her safe. But now, safety meant standing up. Finishing the story, he began. A sharp knock rang out. Dust fell from the ceiling. The trap door shuddered. "They've found it," Elizabeth whispered. James moved toward the door, bracing it. "They'll need more than boots to break it down." Eleanor pulled Emily closer. "Stay behind me, sweetheart." Mark held the phone up, his thumb hovering over send. Another knock, then silence, then a voice. Familiar. "James Matthews?" the voice called. James paused, recognition flickering in his eyes. He opened the small viewing slit in the trapdoor. Sheriff Langston stood above them, hand raised, alone. James unlatched the door and pushed it open cautiously. "Sheriff?" Langston stepped down into the cellar, breathless. "They didn't get in. They're still at the gate, trying to figure out what to do, but that won't last." Mark lowered his phone. "So we still have time?" Langston nodded. "Barely. But I made a call. Old friend in the state press. He's routing your story through a secure news wire. If we transmit from here, they can't stop it in time." James's eyes narrowed. "Won't that put you in danger?" Langston shrugged. "I'm already in it. Might as well be useful." Elizabeth nodded. "Let's do it." They climbed back into the house through the trapdoor, the night air thick with tension. Inside the study, Elizabeth reconnected her laptop to the encrypted network, while Mark queued up the files. Emily stood beside her, watching every step. "Can I press the button?" Mark looked at her, smiled softly. "You sure you're ready?" She nodded. "For my dad." He turned the laptop toward her. Emily reached out with steady fingers and clicked send. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then, confirmation. Upload complete. Story live. Lights blinked. Messages poured in. Journalists, lawyers, whistleblowers, voices from across the country now aware of Windermere, of Nathan, of Emily. Elizabeth leaned back. "It's out." Langston checked his radio. "Now let's see how fast they run." But outside, the rumble of engines began again, closer this time. Uncertainty crept back in. Because though the truth was finally free, those who feared it might still be ready to strike. The hum of the approaching engines grew louder, echoing across the darkened fields like a warning drumbeat. Everyone in the house stood still, staring out the windows as two black SUVs rolled slowly up the gravel drive toward the main house. Their headlights were off. No sirens, just silence and shadows. James moved toward the door, his hand resting on the knob but not turning it. "If they come for us now," he said softly, "they're not here to talk." Mark joined him, holding up his phone. "The story's live. If they hurt anyone, it'll only confirm everything we've exposed." Elizabeth placed herself between the windows and Emily, shielding the girl from view. "They might not care. If they're desperate, they might try anything." Eleanor looked to Sheriff Langston, who stood near the fireplace, revolver holstered at his hip. "What do we do?" Langston's jaw clenched. "We hold our ground. You've done everything right. The truth is out. Now we protect each other." The vehicles stopped just before the porch. 4 men stepped out, suited, armed, their faces stone cold. One held a small tablet. Another held nothing at all, just empty hands and an eerie confidence. James opened the front door slowly and stepped onto the porch, the others watching from behind. "You're trespassing," he said calmly. The man with the tablet spoke. "You published classified material." James shook his head. "We published the truth. Your threats won't work anymore." The man smiled faintly. "You think this ends with a story? That's sweet. But you've disrupted a very old, very expensive operation, one that doesn't like attention." Langston appeared beside James, hand now resting firmly on his weapon. "This is still American soil, still a private residence. You need to leave." The second man stepped forward. "We only want the girl. After that, we're gone." Emily stepped forward from inside the door before anyone could stop her. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said. Her voice was steady, clear. "You destroyed my father's life. You burned his home. You hunted us." The man looked amused. "Your father was a thief." "No," she said, holding up the necklace. "He was a protector, and he trusted me to finish what he started." Behind her, Elizabeth recorded every word with her phone. Mark added, "Smile for the internet, gentlemen. "You're live." The men froze. One glanced to the other. The third turned toward the cars. Then, as if on cue, phones began ringing in their pockets. Buzzing. Vibrating. One of them pulled his out, his expression changing instantly from superiority to alarm. "Orders," he muttered. The man with the tablet cursed under his breath. "Pull out." Without another word, the men turned and retreated to their vehicles. The engines roared to life, and the SUVs backed down the drive, disappearing into the night as quickly as they had come. No confrontation, no fight, just silence. Emily stepped forward, the wind lifting her hair gently as she stared at the empty road. "They're gone," she whispered. James came behind her, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Because they lost." Mark checked his feed. The story's everywhere. News outlets are running it. Former employees of the project are coming forward. The government's responding. Langston gave a rare, small smile. "You brought the empire down with a child's voice and a father's memory." Elizabeth walked outside, phone in hand. "We did it, Emmy." Emily looked up at the stars, tears in her eyes, but a calm in her soul she'd never known. She had a name, a family, a truth, and no one could take it away. But as the family gathered in the doorway, hearts full and futures uncertain, a final question lingered. Who had helped Nathan all those years ago? Who else knew the truth but never said a word? And would they stay silent now, or come forward at last? Because Windermere had found its lost daughter. But the story was still unfolding. Weeks passed, and Windermere Ranch settled into a new rhythm, one marked by peace but also a quiet vigilance. The story of Project 17 had exploded into national news, reaching not just journalists and officials, but everyday people who saw in Emily's face the strength of a child forced to carry a truth adults had buried. She became a symbol of survival, of legacy, of defiance against the powerful. But for Emily, the world beyond headlines remained grounded in the little things. The smell of hay in the stables, the warmth of Stardust's breath as she nuzzled her neck, and the steady arms of Eleanor rocking her during thunderstorms. Windermere wasn't just a safe house anymore, it was home. One morning Elizabeth entered the kitchen holding a thick manila envelope. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "You need to see this," she told James, handing it to him. Inside were legal documents, court orders, signed affidavits, and a notarized letter from a federal investigator. Windermere Ranch, it stated, was officially protected from seizure under whistleblower protection statutes. Even more shocking, the state had launched an inquiry into the men involved in Project 17. Arrests had already begun. James scanned the papers slowly. "They're actually doing it. They're tearing it all down." Elizabeth nodded. "Every ranch that was touched by that syndicate is being audited. The land Nathan saved, his sacrifice, it mattered." Eleanor, hearing the news, pulled Emily into a tight hug. "He did this for you, sweetheart, and now the world knows it." But the letter wasn't all. A second, smaller envelope was tucked inside, addressed simply, "To Emily, from an old friend of your father." Emily opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a worn photograph and a letter written in careful script. "Your father was not alone, he had help. People who believed in the truth but were too afraid to act when he vanished. I was one of them. I've spent years in silence, ashamed that I didn't protect him. But now that you've spoken, others like me are finally stepping forward. Enclosed is a photo your father kept hidden. He said it was from the happiest day of his life. I thought you should have it." Emily pulled the photo free. It was of Nathan, standing in a sun-drenched field, holding a laughing baby in his arms. Her eyes were closed, cheeks round and joyful, a single curl falling across her forehead. He was beaming, not the haunted man she'd come to know through whispers, but vibrant, alive, overflowing with love. Eleanor gasped. "That's you." Emily smiled through her tears. "He looks happy." James placed a gentle hand on her back. "He was. You were his world." The letter continued. "If you ever want to meet those who helped your father, who now wish to honor him, Come to the address below. We're ready to speak." Elizabeth looked at the return label. "It's in Denver, not far." Emily folded the letter and held the photo to her chest. "I want to go." James nodded. "Then we'll take you." Later that evening, Emily walked alone to the front gate, the same one she had cleaned every morning, not knowing why. She reached out, fingers brushing the metal letters. Windmere. Behind her, the ranch buzzed with new life, guests, reporters, even school groups wanting to hear Emily's story. But here, in this quiet place, she spoke only to the wind. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, "for bringing me home." The breeze picked up gently, warm and kind. Somewhere beyond the horizon, more truths waited to be uncovered, and Emily Matthews was ready. A week later, the family packed into the truck and set off for Denver. The city skyline rose gradually in the distance, a sharp contrast to the open pastures of Windmere. Emily sat between James and Elizabeth in the front seat, the letter clutched in her hands. She hadn't let go of it once since the day it arrived. Eleanor sat in the back, carrying a small wooden box they'd filled with keepsakes for the trip. The photo of Nathan, the cassette, a printed copy of the news article that had shaken the country. They didn't know exactly what they would find in Denver, but the Matthews family knew this trip was about more than closure. It was about honoring the man who had risked everything for the girl in the middle seat. They arrived at a modest brick building on the edge of downtown, a converted warehouse with no sign, only the number 417 engraved on a metal plate. James parked and stepped out first, scanning the street carefully. Elizabeth held Emily's hand as they approached the front door. Eleanor followed with the wooden box in her arms. The door opened before they knocked. A tall woman in her 60s, dressed in a tailored navy suit, greeted them. Her silver hair was pulled back tightly, her eyes serious but kind. "Emily?" she asked gently. Emily nodded. "I'm Anna Calvert. I worked with your father before he left the city. Come in. We've been waiting for you." Inside, the space was warm and filled with light. Old filing cabinets lined one wall, but the rest of the room had been transformed into a comfortable meeting space with couches, bookshelves, and a large corkboard covered in photographs, maps, and articles. 8 people stood as the family entered, men and women of various ages, each carrying an air of quiet resolve. Emily recognized some from news coverage: whistleblowers, former lawyers, people who had once worked within the system that tried to silence her father. Anna led them to the center of the room. Before Nathan disappeared, he left behind fragments, files, recordings, codes. He told us not to speak until the truth could survive. When he died, we thought the message died with him. She turned to Emily. "But then you spoke." Emily felt overwhelmed, the attention both humbling and heavy. "I didn't know what I was doing. I found the gate, and I felt like I was supposed to be there." "You were," Anna said simply. "You were always supposed to be the one who brought the story home." James stepped forward. "What happens now?" Anna gestured toward the board. "We've reopened the entire investigation. With your story going public, the Justice Department has requested every document related to Project 17, and they want to speak with Emily when she's ready." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "She's a child. They don't get to drag her into court." "They won't," Anna reassured her. "They want to hear her story on her terms, and there's more." She turned and opened a file on the table. Inside was a court document. "This is a petition to rename Windmere Ranch as a federal historical site. Not just for Nathan, but for every whistleblower who was silenced. It would become a place of education, transparency, a sanctuary." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "A legacy." Emily stepped forward, her fingers brushing the edge of the petition. "It would be his name, wouldn't it? On the sign?" "Yes," Anna said softly. "Nathan Matthews, Memorial Ranch." Emily nodded. "He deserves that." As the meeting continued, more stories emerged about Nathan's final months, his allies, his fears. Emily listened quietly, absorbing it all, her heart swelling with pride and sorrow. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of who her father was, not just a man who ran, but a man who resisted, a man who built hope in the shadow of danger. When the meeting ended, Anna handed Emily a sealed envelope. "Your father wrote this. We kept it in case you ever came." Emily opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single page. "Emmy, if this finds you, it means you found the truth. I wish I could see the person you've become. I hope you're kind and brave and that you still look at the stars with wonder. Don't let them change you. Don't let them win. Everything I did for you. I love you. Dad." Emily folded the letter, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wasn't broken anymore. She wasn't lost. She was her father's daughter, and she was just getting started. They returned to Windmere Ranch with the weight of something new, responsibility, legacy, and above all, hope. News had traveled fast about the visit to Denver, and the ranch had become more than a home. It had become a symbol. People were calling it the ranch that spoke truth. Letters arrived daily. Reporters requested interviews. Activists wanted to help. But the Matthews family remained grounded in what mattered most: Emily. Her days became a balance between media appearances and childhood. Mornings in the pasture with Stardust, afternoons reading in the loft, evenings sharing stories with Eleanor by the fire. And all the while, James and Elizabeth worked behind the scenes to shape the future of the ranch's new role. The paperwork for the historical designation was approved faster than anyone expected. One morning, a letter arrived from the governor's office bearing the state seal and a simple message: "We are honored to recognize Nathan Matthews for his courage. Windmere Ranch is now protected, preserved, and eternal." It was official. The announcement was set to be made at a public ceremony the following weekend. Emily was asked to speak. She practiced her speech for days, with Elizabeth coaching her gently. "Speak from your heart," she'd said. "That's what people heard the first time. That's what they'll listen for again." The morning of the event, the ranch buzzed with life. Folding chairs were set up beneath the large oak tree near the front gate, the same one where Emily had first been spotted, silently scrubbing the iron letters. A small stage had been built. Flags waved gently in the summer breeze. Emily stood behind the gate before the ceremony, tracing her fingers over the W once more. "You ready?" Elizabeth asked gently, approaching from behind. Emily nodded. "I think so. Do you think he'd be proud?" Elizabeth crouched beside her. "He'd be in awe." When the ceremony began, the governor took the stage first. He spoke of courage, of sacrifice, of the power of one voice to awaken a nation. Then James, trembling slightly, told the story of a boy who disappeared and the daughter who returned, carrying with her the last embers of his fire. Finally, it was Emily's turn. She stepped up to the microphone, her small hands gripping the sides of the podium. Hundreds of faces stared back. Cameras rolled. A hush fell over the crowd. "My name is Emily Matthews," she began, her voice clear, steady. "And I didn't always know who I was." She paused, glancing at James, Elizabeth, Eleanor. They smiled. "But I knew I was looking for something, and even when I didn't understand why, I kept cleaning the gate because I believed something waited for me on the other side." She looked down at her notes, then back up. "My father was a whistleblower, a protector. He died trying to make the world safer. He didn't run away from danger. He ran toward me. And that's how I got here. Because love doesn't stop just because someone disappears. Sometimes it just gets quieter until someone listens." There were tears in the crowd now. "I found a home. I found the truth. And now we share it. Because when someone tries to bury the truth, we have a choice. We can help them hide it, or we can dig until we find it again." She held up her necklace. "This was my mom's. My dad gave it to me. It reminds me I come from people who fought, who loved, who didn't give up." A deep silence followed as she stepped back from the podium. Then the applause began, soft, then thunderous, rising to the heavens. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, The new sign was unveiled at the entrance of the ranch, Nathan Matthews Memorial Ranch. A place for truth. Emily stood beneath it, her fingers resting on the wooden post. The past had brought her here. But the future, it was hers now. In the weeks following the dedication ceremony, Windermere Ranch transformed into something more than a landmark. It became a movement. Advocacy groups formed around the message Nathan had died to preserve. Schools began organizing field trips. A documentary crew arrived to record Emily's journey. Journalists referred to her simply as the girl at the gate, a nickname that stuck like folklore. But beneath the surface of celebration, a quiet fire still burned inside Emily. She knew the story wasn't finished. One evening, as twilight settled and the fields shimmered in gold, Emily wandered to the far edge of the property, the old tree line near the northern boundary. It was a place she hadn't explored much before. Elizabeth noticed her from the porch and followed at a quiet distance, giving the girl space but staying close. At the edge of the forest, Emily found a small stone marker half buried in moss. No name, just a symbol, a spiral carved into its surface. She touched it gently. "What do you think it is?" she asked, sensing Elizabeth's presence behind her. Elizabeth knelt beside her. "I don't know, but it looks old." Emily turned to her. Could it be connected to what Dad was hiding? Elizabeth considered that. Maybe. Or maybe he was trying to tell us that Windermere has stories older than even his. They sat quietly as dusk deepened, the wind soft through the trees. Emily broke the silence. "Do you think he'd be okay with all this? The crowds?" "The cameras, the name change," Elizabeth smiled. "I think he'd be proud of how you've carried his story, how you made it your own." Emily looked down at the marker again. "I think there's more, something he didn't get to say." Elizabeth's eyes softened. "Then we'll keep listening." Later that night, after dinner, Emily opened her old sketchbook. She flipped past the drawings she'd made before the truth had come to light, horses, stars, the gate, until she found an empty page. She picked up her pencil and began to draw. First, she sketched Nathan, gentle eyes, strong hands. Then she drew Stardust, Elizabeth, James, Eleanor. At the center, she drew herself standing at the gate, the wind in her hair, her arms wide open. And behind her, rising in faint pencil strokes, she drew something new, a path leading beyond the ranch, through unknown fields and into a distant horizon. Below it, she wrote, "The truth doesn't end, it begins again." The next morning, she showed the drawing to James. He stared at it for a long moment, then gently said, "Would you like to frame it? Maybe hang it in the ranch museum?" Emily hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet." James smiled. "Saving it for something special?" "No," she said softly. "I think I'm saving it for what comes next." Because even with the world watching, even with her story known, Emily knew there were more doors to open, more shadows to shine light into. Windermere had been the beginning, but somewhere out there someone else might be standing at a gate waiting, and Emily Matthews would be ready to help them find it. The first rains of autumn fell gently on Windermere Ranch, washing the dust from the fields and turning the earth rich and dark. The season was changing, but so was everything else. Emily stood at the kitchen window, watching droplets slide down the glass. Behind her, the house buzzed with quiet energy, preparations for a new chapter already underway. Over breakfast, James read aloud a letter from the State Board of Education. "They've approved the curriculum," he said, unable to hide the pride in his voice. "Nathan's story is being taught in school starting next semester. Ethics, truth, environmental responsibility, all of it." Eleanor wiped her eyes with her napkin. He'd never believe it. Elizabeth looked to Emily, who sat calmly, a slice of toast untouched on her plate. "You okay?" Emily nodded. "I was just thinking about the gate." "What about it?" James asked. "I want to go there one last time, just me." They all hesitated, but then Elizabeth stood. "I'll walk with you halfway." Emily stepped out into the mist alone. She moved slowly down the gravel path, her boots leaving small prints in the soft mud. The gate rose ahead, quiet, proud, the iron still clean from that very first morning. She stopped just before it and reached out, her hand resting on the M of Windmere. The rain was light but steady, and in it, she spoke. "I didn't know who I was when I came here. I thought I was just another girl people forgot, but this place, it remembered me. You remembered me." She looked out at the empty road beyond. "I'm not scared anymore." A breeze carried the scent of damp earth and blooming sage across the field, the same scent from the day she met James and Eleanor, the day her life changed. Emily turned back toward the house and began walking, but something caught her eye. A letter tucked in the latch of the gate, sealed, unmarked. She opened it slowly, shielding it from the rain. "To the girl who found the gate, there are others, just like you, lost in systems, hidden by power, waiting to be seen. They don't need heroes. They need truth. You carry it now. If you ever want to help them, we'll be watching." It was unsigned. Emily folded it and placed it carefully in her coat pocket. When she returned to the house, James met her at the door. "Everything all right?" She nodded. "More than all right." Elizabeth handed her a hot cup of tea. "You ready to rest for a while?" Emily looked out at the hills, then back at them. Not yet. Because though the world now knew her name, though justice had been stirred and silence shattered, Emily understood something deeper. Her father had passed her a torch, and now she wasn't just keeping it lit. She was going to carry it farther, to every hidden child, every buried truth, every forgotten gate, until every story was told.